So this morning we are continuing in the Gospel of Mark. And last week we began our journey through Mark. And if you recall, we discussed how Mark was a traveling companion of Peter. And Mark himself, Segi asked a really good question last week. She asked, did Mark ever see Jesus? Did Mark meet Jesus personally? And the answer actually is no. We don't believe that Mark knew Jesus personally. However, as the traveling companion of Peter, he would record the things that Peter shared with him about Jesus. And so we also talked about last week how Mark's purpose in writing the Gospel of Mark was to connect with the early believers who most likely were experiencing persecution and suffering. It's believed that the Gospel of Mark was written around the time where there was great persecution of the Christians in Rome. Possibly, we don't know for sure, but possibly even after the time where Nero started a massive campaign against Christians, where he blamed them for a fire that had happened, which caused great violence to happen to Christians that were then tortured and killed. And so Mark is writing this gospel, and we talked about last week how he's wanting to connect with these early believers who, like himself, had never met Jesus in person. And so they didn't experience the things that Jesus taught or the things that Jesus did firsthand, but he's writing to them to give them courage in the face of the persecution and suffering that they were facing. And we discussed how Mark used two tools in his writing of this letter. Now remember, this is something that would have been heard by the listeners. They wouldn't be reading it. It would be something that was read to them and they would be listening to. So he's using different methods to draw their attention to specific things. One of them, and the first, is that he's very honest about the doubts and the fears of the disciples. Mark is probably the least forgiving towards the disciples and their faith. He doesn't paint them as people who were perfect. He shows very clearly their mistakes and the times that they doubted Jesus. The second thing that he does is the first part moves very quickly. There's a lot of and then, immediately, next, and it goes very fast through 33 years of Jesus' life and ministry. And then the last half of the gospel is all in 1 week. It slows way down, and it's 1 week leading up to Jesus' death. Now, this could be to emphasize, in the first half, there's almost this secret. It's kind of repeated over and over again. Don't tell people that I am the Messiah. Because what's going to happen in the second half is that Jesus is going to be revealed to be the Messiah, but he is the Messiah who will suffer. And Mark is showing the people that it is through their suffering that victory will be won. That death was not the end for Jesus, and death would not be the end for these followers of Jesus. Now, in the story we're listening to today, the authority of Jesus is demonstrated. Unlike Cam, when Jesus spoke, everything listened. That doesn't happen for you in your classroom. It didn't happen this morning. Everybody doesn't stop and listen. But when Jesus spoke, the wind and the waves stopped, demonstrating his authority. We're also reminded of what our posture should be when we are faced with storms and suffering. So when we're faced with storms and suffering, what should we do? Before we settle into the story, I want to set the stage. As you recall from last week, the sea in Scripture represents a place of chaos. It represents destruction and death. And so Mark sets this story after Jesus has already been in a boat teaching about the kingdom of God to great crowds who were listening on the shore. And Jesus spoke in parables to the crowds so that his message was given, but that not many people would truly understand what he was saying. And and again, this likely is because it is pointing to Surprise, Jesus is the Messiah. And surprise even more, he's not coming to conquer in the ways that we think through power and strength, but his power and strength will be revealed in the way that he offers himself and suffers. So even when some things are hidden to the large crowds, Jesus still pulls his disciples aside and teaches them privately the meaning of the parables. He even tells them, "For there is nothing hidden except to be disclosed, nor is anything secret except to come to light." So there will be a time when the disciples will share with others all that Jesus has taught and done. So following a full day of teaching from the boat and then taking his disciples aside and teaching them privately, it is now the end of the day. Evening is setting upon them, and Jesus says, "Let's go across to the other side of the sea." Now, apart from the sea being a place where anything can happen, and the Sea of Galilee being known for its storms, they are also crossing over to the other side to a region that is a region of Gentiles, people who do not worship God. And so there was plenty of reasons for the disciples to hesitate. But what's interesting is that's not mentioned. And we will see, and once again, we will see that Mark is not concerned about making the disciples look bad. So if they were hesitant, he wouldn't have been afraid to say it, right? But there doesn't seem to be any hesitation on their part to set off. Now, the text says that they took Jesus as he was. And I've wondered what that small phrase means. And after searching, I didn't find any insights into it. Nobody had any thoughts about what this phrase might mean. But from the immediate context and the deep sleep, as Jesus is later comfortably asleep on a cushion in the stern, my guess is that it simply means he was exhausted. He was tired. The reality of his humanity and its limitations, of his exhaustion after a long day of teaching, and exhaustion after trying to explain things to the disciples when it feels like they never understand. At the end of the day, he's tired and he's exhausted. But this human limitation is going to be a direct contrast to his divinity, the fact that he is God and that there are no limits on his power. But it wasn't, what's interesting too, as they get ready to cross, is it wasn't just one boat. It was multiple boats. In the past, when I've read this story, I've just thought about there's just one boat and they're all, the disciples and Jesus are all together and they're going across the sea. And maybe it's that way in the other gospels. In this particular gospel, there's many boats. Which implies to me that they're rather small, because it can't fit all 12 of the disciples. And so it says that he goes with the other boats across. Now, as they are in the boat, a windstorm, much like the one we're experiencing today, probably just like that. Imagine you're out in the middle of a sea with this wind on a small boat, right? And the waves start coming. And it says the waves are crashing and they're coming over and they're taking on a ton of water. And they are like, we are going to drown. We are in the middle of the sea. There's no way we could swim to shore. We are going to drown. And so they start panicking. And they go over to Jesus, who is so tired. I don't know if you've ever been this tired in your life, but so tired that even that kind of storm could not wake him up. I mean, he must have been so tired. And so they go over to him and they say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are dying? Do you not care that we are dying?" And so Jesus gets up and with 4 words, he calms the wind and the sea. Be still, be quiet. Probably in the Aramaic, it's only 2 words. Be still and be quiet. He then questions them about why they are afraid, asking a follow-up question about their faith. Have you no faith? Now, witnessing this, they were filled with fear, witnessing what Jesus did. Could you imagine? I mean, we have a very good picture for us today, right? 58-mile-an-hour wind gusts. And can you imagine Jesus just us being like, "Jesus, make it stop. Like, what is happening? Why don't you care about us?" And he goes out there and he says, "Be still." And it just stops. And there's just dead calm. I think that would be amazing. And they were so surprised that they were afraid of him. Because they were like, "Who is this person?" who can command the wind. We know, living here on the Eastern Plains, commanding the wind is not something that anyone can do. This past week, John Perkins, who was a civil rights activist, preacher, author, and person who developed many ministries to care for the poor and the vulnerable, passed away at the age of 95. He lived a long life dedicated to following Jesus and proclaiming the good news and standing for justice and reconciliation. There was a point in his life where he was arrested, put in jail, and tortured. He was beaten up badly by the guards in the prison. Unjustly. He was treated unjustly. He suffered a lot from the death of his brother, who was murdered, to the point of his two of his children passing. He suffered a lot, experienced a lot of poverty himself. And he wrote a final book in his last years of his life, and it was called Count It All Joy. It's from what we read in James a few weeks ago. Count it all joy. And it was subtitled The Ridiculous Paradox of Suffering. How joy and suffering go together. Now, as I listened to this book, I couldn't help but see Jesus sleeping on a cushion in the stern while a storm is raging. In his book, he talks about 3 types of suffering. He talks about suffering that is brought about from our own sin, suffering that is placed upon us outside of our own will, like cancer or natural disasters or abuse, and suffering that we choose as we are faithful to the gospel and the call of Jesus in our lives. The times we put ourselves in dangerous situations to proclaim or demonstrate the good news of the gospel. Now, all of these storms, we are tempted to question God. And he identifies 3 temptations that we experience when the storms of life come to us. And the first one he calls the temptation of the lust of the flesh, or the greed of the flesh. And what he means by that is when we develop a physical dependency on something to numb the pain. Right? It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be binge watching where you're getting dopamine in your body. It could be anything where we are depending on something else. We develop a dependency to escape from the pain, to numb the pain. The second one he talks about is a lust of the eyes, or greed of the eyes, when we long for things that the world promises will bring happiness. Wealth or power or status, and we just want them so that we can overcome our suffering, so that we won't suffer anymore. If only I had this, then the suffering would be gone. And the last temptation, he said, is pride. That when we as followers of Jesus refrain from the lust of the flesh and we refrain from the lust of the eyes, we then expect that God owes us something. God owes us his favor. We've been good. We've been following him. We shouldn't be facing storms. God should have favor on us. That's the third temptation that he talks about. Now, at the heart of these 3 temptations is the greatest temptation of all, to question the presence and love of God. Underneath all of that is this burning question. Is God really with me? Does God really love me? Like we talked about this morning. Is God really real? Does God really love me enough to protect me? These are the questions that come to our mind. And this is what the disciples were experiencing in that boat. Jesus was with them, but he wasn't really with them. He was asleep. As a kid, when you're trying to wake up your parents and they won't wake up, or you're trying to get their attention and they won't listen to you, it doesn't feel like they're really with you. And for the disciples, it didn't feel like Jesus was really with them. And then their question brings it to light so clearly. Teacher, do you not care that we are dying? Do you not care? Not, Jesus, why are you sleeping? Not, why don't you do something about this? But the question is, do you not care? Are you not with us? Do you not love us? So Jesus rebukes the wind, and then he turns to his disciples to ask, why are you afraid? Now, I want to be clear that fear is a natural response to your life being in danger. And I don't think that Jesus is actually upset with their fear from the very real danger that they were in. Instead, I think the next part of the question, have you still no faith, reveals the heart of his concern. Do you still not trust me? Do you still not know who I am? Do you still not know that I love you? When we are afraid, what do we do with our fear? The disciples' decision to wake up Jesus was the right thing, but that action was done out of doubt rather than faith. Do you not care? When we were in the book of James, we talked a lot about the concept of doubt and what doubt means. That it is not so much about not having any fear or not having any questions, but it was more about not being double-minded, of living in a way that what we say we believe does not match our actions. That in moments of pressure, we waver in our trust in Jesus, in the presence and the love of God. That's the doubt that we're talking about. Have you no faith? When we waver in our trust in Jesus, in the presence and love of God. When Jesus was facing his own storm in the garden, he was afraid. He had questions. He wanted the cup taken from him. He literally said, if it's possible, take this cup from me. He was sweating. He was anxious. That's a natural human response to our lives being in danger. But Jesus prayed, not my will, but your will be done. And after being strengthened, he faced the storm with full confidence of his Father's love. As I was preparing this sermon, a song came on that pulled me into the moment. I was reading this story and this song was on, and it was the most amazing experience, and I wanted to share it with you. So we're going to close this time by listening to this together.